Welcome back, everyone. I am Renee Koster, Learning Experience Designer and Strategist, and this is the Learning Experience Design for Changemakers podcast. This show exists because I believe the most powerful learning does not happen in a slide deck. It happens when a leader takes something she knows, shapes it into an experience, and hands it to the people who need it most. Every guest in this series is doing exactly that. They are building organizations, programs, movements that teach, connect, and transform. And I am here to learn alongside them and bring their work to you. So today, my guest is Molly Jobson. She is the executive director of the Morgan Log House in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. And she is working to transform a historic site into a living, community owned resource. And I'm going to turn the mic over to her so she can introduce herself and tell you about the Log House.
Hi, I am Molly Jobson. I am lucky enough to serve as the executive director at Morgan Log House. We are a historic home museum and it is located in Lansdale. Our actual address is Lansdale, but we're in Towmenson Township. And our house is a historic home museum. And so we look at what life was like from 1774 till 1964 in the home, as well as how the families connect to the greater community. As I said, I came on in the organization in 2023. So it's been a very exciting time. The organization has gone through a lot of changes, upgrades, and it's just becoming more and more of a living community piece.
I am so excited to know you and have the opportunity to work with you and visit the museum. I come from an education and anthropology background, and I know you've studied history and a little bit of anthropology. So I know how rarely someone ends up in history by accident. There's usually a moment, teacher, place that a question that just you couldn't let go of. So, what pulled you towards history in the first place?
Yeah, I think I am one of those oddballs that I always knew I loved history. And maybe it was because when I was younger, I grew up in a neighborhood where there wasn't a lot of kids. So I would sit with my older neighbors, and I was a very inquisitive child and an inquisitive person to this day. And I would just sit and listen to their stories. I would hear about the Great Depression, I would hear about World War II, Vietnam War, and then I'm originally from Wisconsin, born and raised. I'm a cheesehead and I'm proud of it to the day I die. And there is a museum in Wisconsin. It is called Old World Wisconsin. And what it is it's acres of land where they move these historic homesteads to this property. So there's a German homestead, a Polish homestead, a Swedish homestead, also a whole Victorian village that you can just walk around and ask questions. And as I said, I was such a curious kid. And my mom was like, we need to get her out and she needs to be able to ask these questions. And so she would just take me to Old World, Wisconsin, and I would run around and ask all of the burning questions were in my head. And for me, historic home museums allow the visitor to actually put their feet in the shoes of those who lived in that home. And to me, when I would be walking around the Victorian home, I could imagine myself in a Victorian outfit. And for me, it made exciting, and it didn't make history just seem like this boring thing that it was just dates and times. It was tangible, it was living, it was all around us. And so that's what made me fall in love with history. Also, I have a grandfather who was very passionate about history. And so, again, history was something that was talked about a lot in our house, and which is kind of odd because everyone else in my family is in the medical field. And then there's just me as a historian. I am the oddball, but it was something that was discussed. And my grandfather focused a lot on the Wild West and the Native Americans out west. But I just remember he had a room. They lived in northern Wisconsin. And so he would go looking for arrowheads, if he would find antlers or skeletons of an animal. He was also a taxidermist, but he did Native American beading on the skulls. So again, I think that all of that together fostered this love. And for me as a historian, I've always loved oral histories. And
Mm.
because I think it's so fascinating to see what people overcome because we all see people being successful and doing their job, but behind closed doors, we all have our struggles. We all go through our uphill battles, and those are what really makes a person. And so, being a historian, being able to tell those stories, it just gives me a lot of passion.
I love that. And I love that story. And I have a similar story with history. I grew up in the next town over was Constableville, New York, and teeny tiny town in northern New York. And we had the Constable Hall, and it was the family that the town was named after, and their home was a living museum. And you got to walk through it and experience it and see the different rooms set up and go and see the garden. So I have a very clear picture of what your old
Yeah.
town, Wisconsin was like. And that's amazing. So you had a very early passion for history. Was working in a historic museum always on your trajectory, or what is this different than the direction that you saw yourself going?
I think I always knew I was going to come back to history. As a kid, you go through the weird cycles. I wanted to be a marine biologist, but do I like the ocean? No, I'm terrified of the ocean. Why did I think that was going to be a job for me? There was a period of my life where I wanted to be a lawyer. Again, looking back, I'm like, that is not the right career path for me. And so, a long story short, I think through high school, middle school, there was a weird phase where I wanted to be a garbage man. So you go through weird cycles but I would say probably late high school, I really knew I wanted to go into history. I knew that was where I wanted. And actually, when I started my undergrad, I was going to do history and education because I really wanted to be a teacher. I love
Mhm.
teaching. I love getting that excitement and lighting, like seeing that light bulb go off for kids. And that to me, that's really exciting. Unfortunately, the education classes, it just felt like I was nails on a chalkboard, and if I'm spending $40,000 a year on a university, I want to make sure I'm doing something I love. And so that's when I switched to anthropology. And so history and anthro are my undergrad, and my master's is public and applied history. And what I love about being in a museum is it allows me to be a non formal educator. And so it gives me a little bit more wiggle room, and I don't have to deal with all of the politics to the same extent as a formal education. And I'm able to make history just fun and hands on. And to me, I think that's the most important thing because when you talk about history to the average person, they're like, I don't, this is boring. And for me, that's nails on a chalkboard to me because I think history is the least boring thing in the whole wide world. My motto is history is a mystery, and it's our job to unravel the different layers of the past. Because if we look at who has written most of our history, it is the victors, it is men, and a lot of it is written by a white man. So there are so many different stories and viewpoints that have yet to be discovered. And for me, I think that's the most exciting part about it. And also, we think that history is just a date and people and a house, but everything has a history. Our computers that we're sitting on has a history. It was not always like this. It has had to evolve. Where we plant certain plants, why certain trees are here. Those are all part of history. And I think that's really exciting that you can walk down the road and get these questions like, why was this planted here? Walked on this sidewalk. What are the stories that they would have told when they're walking on the sidewalk with their family? And to be able to get people to start thinking like that is really exciting and fulfilling for me.
I love that. And the your line about history is a mystery and wanting to unravel what's really behind all that. How did you get from there to the Morgan Log House? That love for history and seeing it as a mystery, like how did that lead to you being here?
Yeah, I have had a crazy career. I will just put that out there. This is a long story. I will try to make it as short as possible. So, as I said, I have my undergrad in history and anthropology. I graduated from Ripon College, which is in Ripon, Wisconsin. And after I graduated, it was 2010 and I was looking for internships. And so I applied through the Student Conservation Association for a paid internship at Gray Towers National Historic Site. And so Gray Towers was located in Milford, Pennsylvania, and which is at the top of the Poconos. And it is a one stoplight town and right along the Delaware River, right where New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania all meet. And so I was living in Wisconsin at this time and I saw that internship and I was like, I'm going to get it. And I told my mom, and because we were living in Wisconsin, she was like, yeah, sure, you're going to get it. And a couple months later, I got the internship and I was moving to Pennsylvania. And so again, I knew not a single person in Pennsylvania. I got paid $75 a week. Luckily, I lived in the farmhouse that was originally part of the property. And I was only supposed to be there 3 months as interpretive tour guide. And the Forest Service had a nonprofit friends group, which had never had a staff person before. And my mentor, she saw a lot of potential in me. And she was like, I think we should try to get the Heritage Association to hire you. So at 22 years old, I went in front of a board and pitched myself to be their first staff person ever. And so from 2011 to 2014, I worked and was the sole staff person for that friends group. And so I organized 13 public programs for them. I wrote their grants. My biggest accomplishment on the site was when I first got there, the original cemetery for Great Milford was on the property. And it hadn't been a priority for the Forest Service for a lot of years. And so when I arrived, I said, by the time I leave, this cemetery will be a priority. And I got a $20,000 grant to start restoring the cemetery. And now it makes me very proud because the cemetery is part of their annual programming. It's cleaned up and I'm very proud that I pushed for that. And at times they looked at me like I had three heads, but it was what it was. And during those years, I really found out that I loved running an organization. I love being creative. I love thinking outside of the box to get things accomplished. And so I knew that's where I was going to go. And then on top of all of this, I was only working part-time with the Heritage Association, so I also was working front desk at a hotel twice a week, and then there was another friends group to the Forest Service. It was the Pinchot Institute for Conservation. Their main headquarters is in DC, but they were celebrating their 50th anniversary at Gray Towers, and they wanted someone on site to organize that, which was very exciting, but also not all of the organizations worked well together. So I was the referee and the middle person, and which was very much an eye-opening experience at 23 years old. But it was great. After I did that, I went back to Wisconsin for about 4 years. I have a sister who has some health concerns, so I wanted to be closer to my family. And during that time, I did development work with the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation and the Arthritis Foundation. And then I also was a community engagement specialist for a local Milwaukee nonprofit called the Harbor District, which was working to revitalize Milwaukee's Inner Harbor. And while I worked with that organization, I started a street festival, which still goes on to this day, which makes me very happy. And I developed some school programming in regards to teaching about public planning and restoration of a community. So, and then like I said, I'm sorry, this is a long story. And in 2019, I was visiting France, or not France, I was visiting Italy, and I was walking around Florence, and I said, okay, now it is time for me to go back and get my master's. And so while I was in Italy, I applied for my master's program. And when I got back, I started. So I got my master's in public and applied history from Southern New Hampshire University. I did it online. It was a great experience. I worked full time while I was doing it. I have all of the positive things to say about that experience. But so when I came back, it was 2019. I was I decided I was going to sell my house in 2020 and take unpaid internships until I found a job in the middle of a pandemic. And I did it. I lived in an Airbnb for about 4 months, and what brought me back to this area is I got an internship with Historic Bethlehem. And I was in charge of organizing their 2 months of COVID friendly Christmas programming. So if you were in Bethlehem during 2020 and you went to Christmas in the Quarter, that was my project. And so that was great. And after that experience, I was originally supposed to go up to Sandwich, Massachusetts and work at a museum there. But Historic Bethlehem ended up hiring me as their director of visitor services and outreach. And I stayed there for about a year, but I was commuting from down here up to Bethlehem, plus working on my master's, and it just became too much. And so when I finished my master's in 2022, then I was just working some retail jobs in the area just to have a job while I was looking for something in history. And I have to say, I have to give my mom props because she was the one that actually found Morgan Loghouse
Oh,
and emailed it to me and said, I think this is the right place for you. And I was nervous, of course. And I got the job and I've loved it every single day. I know that I'm lucky when I get to say that I have fun every single day at my job.
wow, I love that. And I understand what hearing you talk about what you do and the Morgan Log House is you can tell how much you love it. So,
Yeah, every day's an adventure, and I love that.
yeah. So we are fortunate in that we are in an area with a lot of history, and there are a lot of historic sites. The work you're doing, the community programming, our workshop series that we're creating right now, the partnerships, it seems, I know, is very intentional. Tell us more about how you see the Morgan Log House as part of the community, because this is something that we've talked about before, about how it's not just an isolated historical site. It's so much more. Tell our listeners more about that.
Yeah. So there are many reasons why I think Morgan Log House really is unique, I should say. When we look at a lot of historic homes, they are the wealthy, political figures, generals, and this is a glimpse at the everyday working class family. So this is what I probably would be doing. This is what our life is. And this house was lived in from 1774 till 1964. So it is a huge amount of history. And all of the families that lived here were so closely connected with the greater community. So it gives us so many opportunities. And we have Morgan descendants that still volunteer with us. We have Castle descendants that still volunteer with us. And the Castles are our longest tenants. They lived here for 99 years. The family that lived here in the 1930s, the Forsyths, their descendants still volunteer with us and can tell us family stories, bring kitchen gadgets that were actually used here in the house. And those are the stories that give a home life. And I tell everyone, if it wasn't for us and the stories that we're telling and people visiting it, it's just a shell. The personalities, the stories, the warmth that we bring to it make the house alive. And we have, I think, as small historic museums, we have a huge opportunity to become true partners in the community, because not only do partnerships help a museum move their mission forward, it also, a lot of us have very small staffs. And so it allows us to delegate and lighten the load of some of that work, but also give back to the community. So one thing that I try to do every year is one of our open houses, I try to do a food drive. So instead of charging a fee, we ask people to bring non-perishable food items. We grow potatoes on our site. So, and at our Harvest Heritage Day, we invite the community and kids to come harvest potatoes. And then we donate those to a local food pantry as well. At Christmas time for our holiday programming, instead of a fee, we ask for Toys for Tot donations. This year, we did a book drive for Read Across America. And my whole theory is, if I want the community to support us, I need to show that I'm supporting the greater community, not just historically, but the greater community, because we are all in this together. If we want to make a difference, if we want to become more understanding society and community, we have to work together and we have to listen to each other. And I tell my volunteers here, we're a family at the end of the day. There are going to be days that we don't agree with each other, but at the end of the day, we all have the same passion and mission, and that's to keep Morgan Log House alive in our community and have it become a community resource. And the one thing, and it happens all the time, is people are like, I've lived in Lansdale my entire life, but I've never heard of Morgan Log House. So that's a big part of my role right now, is just letting people know that we're here and we want you to come visit and we want you to be a part of our history.
Yeah, I love that. I know you have, this is a big year, especially for historical societies, especially in this area and the time period that the Morgan Log House was being built and lived in originally, the 250th celebration. What are some exciting programs that you have going on?
Yeah, so I would say the next 3 years are actually pretty exciting for this area in Montgomery County. So this year, of course, it's the 250th signing of the Declaration of Independence. In 2027, it's the 250th anniversary of George Washington's troops camping in Towamencin. And then I believe 2028 is Towamencin's 300th anniversary. So we have 3 very big years ahead of us. And when I was looking at figuring out programming for this year, I really looked at who was living in the house at this time and what would they have been doing. And so the family that lived in the home, they were the Castle family. They were a Mennonite family, and the Mennonites are historically pacifist. And our site, we did not have George Washington's troops on it. And and when I was thinking of our planning, I in my mind was like, you know what? We're going to support other sites. And because I want to stay true to the history and the families that lived and set up this home. And so, of course, we are acknowledging it. We are being a part of every community's 250th event. But here at our site, I'm trying to stay a little bit truer and educating on those different voices. And one thing, as you mentioned, Renee, we are working on our speaker series. So, the untold stories of the revolution, which I think is just as important as the Revolutionary War soldiers' point of view. But our big celebration will be in October 24th, because this year is also our 50th anniversary of being a historic site. So
Oh,
that is our big celebration. So October 24th, we'll be doing our Harvest Heritage Day, but we're going to be kicking off the day with a rededication. And we got a brand new roadside marker. So that will be unveiled at that event.
that is exciting. And I want to touch back on something that you said earlier in our conversation about seeing the opportunity to be non-formal education and teaching as part of this historic site work. I know as a teacher and someone who works with clients, like that aha moment is so rewarding. What do some of your favorite aha moments look like from visitors to the Morgan Log House?
Yeah. So, as I said, I love doing kid programs and having kids on the site, because I even tell adults, you already care about history. It's these guys that I need to
Yeah,
convince that history is cool. And and I'm not the coolest person, so it's a little bit of a challenge sometimes. But I try to make history tangible to them. So when we walk into the kitchen, I go, okay, we're in the kitchen. What's missing? What's missing from this kitchen? What do you have in your kitchen at home? And we have a stove, an oven, a microwave, a refrigerator. And I'm like, well, they have all these things, just looks a little different and works a little differently. And I break it down that way. And one of my favorite connections is talking about the rope bed. So in colonial times, you would have slept in a rope bed. And before you would go to bed, you would need to tighten those ropes. And that's where we get the saying, sleep tight, don't let the bed bugs bite. And yeah. And so I tell kids, I go, so who here has slept on an air mattress? And almost all of them raise their hand. And I'm like, well, what happens if you don't blow up your air mattress all the way? And they're like, it droops down in the middle. You're sleeping on the floor.
yeah.
And that's the same concept as a rope bed. And so it's a feeling that they know and that they can connect the dots. And one of something that actually made me cry one time is I think it was on our military might program. I was outside and I had a volunteer grab me and was like, "You have to come in here, Molly." And there was a young boy who was giving his mom almost a verbatim tour of mine. And it was just one of those moments where I was like, "Yep, this is why I do my job. This sunk in. This is great." I had one of my girlfriends, she brought her niece and nephew for a tour, and they were like, "Oh, we don't really wanna go," and I guess the second they got in the car without her even asking, they were like, "That was so cool. That was so much fun," and they wanted to go to Gettysburg, and they were like, "Can Molly be our tour guide?" So I actually took their family to Gettysburg, and that's, to me, is what's fun and exciting, and the more and I give kids opportunities to ask the questions because I think that is where real education comes from, is those questions and foster those questions. And so I at any of my tours, I always am like, if you have a question, raise your hand because I want to know what your question is because I would rather talk to you about what you're curious about than me just blabbing on about a million other things. And I think giving kids an opportunity to truly have a voice and to ask questions and not feel judged for asking questions really allows that education to grow and for them to get really excited about that education.
That is amazing. I love that you have the opportunity to create that safe space for the kids and grow their own curiosity. So, for any of the listeners out there who are like, okay, I need to go see the Morgan Log House now, when can they come? How can they find out more information?
Yeah. So, as I said, we are every once in a while doing different outdoor or different community programs. But on average, we do tours Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at 12, 1, and 2. I always suggest to people check our social media at Morgan Loghouse. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Check there just to make sure we're not at some community event. We also try to post that on our website if we're going to be at a different community event, but you can always check out what's going on at our website, which is www.morganloghouse.org. And as I said, we do tours Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 12, 1, and 2 from April to December.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Molly, for being our guest and telling us all about your journey and love for history and the Morgan Log House.
Yeah, and if any listener, anyone there would like to connect with me or pick my brain more, you're always happy to send me an email at director@morganloghouse.org.
Thank you. And I'll make sure to have all those links in the notes. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect.